Madeleine Spencer is the owner of a consulting practice called Diamond Heart Enterprises, which works with groups on communications, community building, innovation, and new ventures. She had worked with community groups on numerous municipal projects, including strategic planning, economic development, educational innovation, and general planning. Most projects she has worked on have centered on the city of Santa Ana and have taken place within the Orange County region. In this episode, we have talked about arts and community engagement, place making an impact, meaningful places, education, and multi generational facilities, and much more.
Hello, Madeleine. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you and where you are right now?
Um, Thank you for having me. I looked forward to being on your show. Um, I am currently in the city of Tustin at a local coffee shop because my location doesn't have good Wi-Fi.
That's so sweet. Oh my God, you are here with this, this new setup and new place, and doing this show with me. It's special. It feels special to me. Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank
lovely. Okay, so let's then start with the question before there is noise around. The noise around increases or something like that. Okay, so tell me, how did you find your passion for public spaces and the placemaking movement?
How did I find my passion? It's really interesting because I think that some of what I'm going to say today is informed by a placemaking weekend that we just finished in New Orleans. And what we've been doing is these placemaking weekends where we call groups of people who are interested in learning to come, and then we do a tour of the place and connect with different stakeholders who are all a part of that place and are doing amazing, interesting projects. And so we just had a group of around 20 people who went to New Orleans, and every day of the tour, we got to meet with wonderful people and see their projects. And I think that there was just a moment where we had gone to a farm where the food was produced by a chef there, and it was a beautiful day. And we had gone through all these different spaces and places throughout the city and had learned so much. And it just was like this beautiful moment. And I realized that there is nothing, I don't think, that compares to being alive in the action of actually learning about things that help people to gain agency with their own project because they have seen the processes of others. And maybe if they feel stuck and they're actually in the world and really meeting and engaging with new people, that it really can change the way that they are thinking about what they're doing, and they can get very inspired. And I saw it and I was very moved again by this process. And I think that that is something that for me makes like the work of placemaking so worthwhile. And it's just knowing that people are not stuck, that the imagination and the cultivation of recognition through all these other people that are doing such amazing things really can make you remember that, oh, there's this thing that I can actually do, or maybe I can just change this little thing and it will help. So I think that that's really exciting. And I think it's something that people don't think about, the value of that process of engagement. And one more thing is, there was a woman who said, um, one of the things when she was sitting there eating the lunch, which was so beautifully prepared, she said one of the things she remembered for home is that relationships start by just something simple as sitting down and eating with people. And before you start making big plans about things you're going to do at a level of government or other levels, that you really need to build trust. And trust starts with something very, very fundamental, which is simply sitting down and sharing a meal and talking.
Yeah, that's very sweet. And I first of all, it was a learning lesson that if we want to build trust with people and we want to engage, then we should have food on table as well, and we should sit down and have a in an informal setup. We should have a conversation first, and then move towards the big ideas, right? And secondly, yeah, the learning opportunities that come with this process is indeed something that inspires me as well. So thank you for explaining it and for sharing your experience with me. Um, your personal interest with me. Okay, tell me about the Healthy Communities Initiative.
Healthy communities. So I believe that you're talking about a current project, is that right? Or are you thinking of so when you say healthy communities, I'm thinking of right now, I'm working on a project called Reconnect South Park, and it is in Seattle, and it's about a freeway removal for a community. But at the same time, I'm not sure if you mean our the project that we've been working on, like that is our United Streets of America project. So
Uh,
I wasn't sure with this
yeah.
question, which
Uh,
thing.
I think it's more about the general idea, like you are supporting, why are you supporting the Healthy Communities Initiative, and what are the different aspects that you are working on it a lot in, under this
Well,
category.
okay, so if we're just talking about healthy communities in general, like I really believe in communities having the capacity to thrive. It's not, I learned also, it's not just about resilience. Resilience is the adaptation to trauma or to things that occur like natural disaster, etc. But what I think is really important is that communities need to establish systems that go beyond just resilience and have created ways for people to actually enjoy life. And so I think that when we talk about healthy communities too, that it's we also learn that it's a wraparound system. It's not just one thing. It's that a pipeline of many, many things that are needed in order for a person to be healthy and happy. And many communities have been devastated, and they're still being devastated by all kinds of things like climate change. They don't have food, maybe they don't have water, maybe they don't have um ways to have transport. There's so many things. And I think that as population is going higher and people are moving into urban spaces, that we need each other, and we also need to remember some wisdom of very basic ways that human beings have been able to maintain having like food, clothing, and shelter. And um one of the things that we know is that building the social life actually gives more opportunities from many different sides to remember how to take care of yourself and how to take care of your community.
Yeah, I agree. And the reason why I was looking forward to talking with you was because of your diverse experience in the different areas which are very important and are under discussion as per SDGs as well. So I want to ask that what are the steps you have taken for educational innovation? Because I see we need a lot of work to be done in this area. I guess I'll hear you first, and then I'll put some of my feedback to it as well.
Okay, well, you said education innovation, and I think that, for example, this idea of piloting, well, for me, this idea of being able to go out and learn from other people, it's funny because Ryan, who works with me in the movement, my colleague, he actually is a person who does a lot of traveling. And one of the things he often has seen, and it's very typical, is that many people don't leave their home or their hometown, and they haven't had the opportunity to see different worlds and different systems and different things. And so oftentimes people can have essentially a failure of imagination when it comes to things. And like I said, this opportunity to see different things, and also it almost allows you to go through a process that you didn't actually know how to do on your own. And it gives almost like a piloting. It's like having a pilot that has already shown you how something can work differently. And I think that this is the innovation in education that comes along with being able to explore these different kinds of systems and actually taking some time to go and look beyond where you're at. And so for instance, these placemaking weekends, or having these tours of places and seeing all these different systems, I think that that one is a really good way. And also being able to connect with other placemakers, and just even on a virtual level, being able to share and hear from each other about ways and things are done. Um, I remember like oftentimes being surprised that, like, for example, with an educational program where they were talking about how high school students were connected at a very with little children at a very early age that didn't have art, for example, in their education, and they would be partnered almost like a big brother or a big sister. And then for the life of the whole time that they were in school, they were almost mentoring and making sure that these youth are being not only taught but also being brought along with them. And hearing that, I was like, oh, that's wonderful, because if you don't have the opportunity to actually already have a program in your school, you at least have a connection from somebody who can help you to work through that. And so to me, those are like small innovations and very simple things that just connect the fabric of a system that might not be there.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Okay. So, since I have, I've seen or I have experienced myself things that I wish were there in our educational system, and definitely there were loopholes, or maybe there were different requirements for myself and for people I knew around me. And while I was learning and evolving as a placemaker, I learned and realized that there are a lot of things that a placemaker can do through their activities, like the experiential learning opportunities that we can give to students as well as to ourselves. Like I have learned a lot through all the activities that I do under this placemaking movement, and in itself it is educational opportunity, and it doesn't have to be certified by the institute where students are, you know yeah, where they are enrolled in, maybe say that way. But I think the education doesn't have to be the responsibility of school only, but
Mm,
there must be different opportunities as well, right? And
yes.
we must be open to them.
Yes, and oftentimes that's another thing, is that we compartmentalize like different aspects of school life, etc. And those compartments in reality need to be broken down, because like even those settings don't create the kind of recognition of how things are connected. It's kind of like, with plants, like seeing a plant grow from a seed all the way to a tree, let's say. Like if you only see parts
Yeah.
of a stage, then you're never understanding the whole. And in reality, the system is a part of a whole. So having those opportunities to engage at different levels, like in public life as well as private life, um it really helps. It's really interesting because somebody had brought up how they had seen these youth who had done these projects out in the community, and all of a sudden their grades in school started to go up because, for example, if somebody is let's say an doing a kind of activism in the city where they're like trying to get transparency, or they're trying to work on public processes, and they're actually engaging with a city hall, or they're actually going out and talking to their neighbors, all of a sudden the history class, which doesn't make any sense to them when it comes to public policy and process, all of a sudden they're looking at this and they're like, wait a minute, I just did this. I actually went to my city council, and all of a sudden it clicks in their head that this book that they're reading that seemed dead before becomes alive, because they actually experienced the process and then connected the knowledge. And I think that we originally had this sense, like even when we learned to walk, we didn't actually, we experienced walking before we understood what we were doing. Or and I think that a lot of times people think that it's going to happen the other way, like you're going to read a book and then you're going to learn how to walk, but it never works like that. So reconnecting people through the actual process and then learning about what they're doing, you know?
Yeah, that's a common sense, and we are just realizing that. And yeah, it was very inspiring, and thank you. And I believe that I'm going to follow this more in my, in my pursuing of the leadership over here, inshallah. Okay, so Ryan Smaller mentioned in his interview that you helped connect downtown to schools and families in the neighborhood. Why was it your top priority, and how did you model it in a way that also brought the place with livability and vibrancy that a great destination or a place must have?
So it's very interesting because I think that there was a few different things. One of them is I was working for a group of people in a business district, and the businesses had not seen youth in the downtown at all. It was very vacant. Nobody was there. And one of the women, who was an older, like mother type person, she actually said, you know, where I'm from, which is Mexico. She said, if our children are not in our city, then neither are their parents. And if, for example, if it's a shopping district and you want people there, that you need to make sure that the whole family is coming to the space. And she said they told us stories about how, for example, they would see a municipal band, like there would be a band that was from the school, and they would actually march through the streets and they would share the music. Um, and she's like, how can we bring the students here? And so I was very lucky, because right as she had was asking those questions, we were trying to connect with the school to ask to find out, you know, what is it that we can do to connect with you and to make not only a platform for the students to participate in public life, but also for us to be able to participate through many different channels. So, like, for example, that students would learn about their businesses, etc., maybe get jobs there when they're like younger, etc. So a whole kind of system. And what happened was there was a woman who was voted to become a visual and performing arts coordinator for the school right at that time. And it was all of the students and the families that made this vote that they wanted more arts. So I connected with this woman, and she had sparks in her eyes, and I knew that we would be able to do something. So one of the things that we started was to create, first of all, an open way for, we have an annual or regular art walk. So on the first Saturday of every month, you know, students come out, and we created spaces for students to show us the kind of learning that they were doing in school, whether it be in plays, art, music. And that was the first thing. And it was very interesting because we saw when parents came, they always come to see their youth, you know. So the parents came, and when they were in the space of the downtown, we originally watched as parents were very surprised, like they had never been in this downtown space, and they were like shy, and they were at first not really engaging with the environment around them. But after 3 times of watching the students in the space, suddenly we saw everybody starting to become comfortable. And then we saw like parents and grandparents there eating, drinking, watching their kids. And it started to change the way that the actual interaction between the public space and the folks who were from the community who had never been there started to act. That was the first thing. The second thing was the the we wanted to have a youth arts festival, and we also wanted to bring in literature. So it was through this idea, and we had been hearing it a lot of times, that people wanted to have a place to speak, tell poetry, share art and everything. So we established this festival once a year in March, and it's coming up, and it's called Boca de Oro, or Mouth of Gold Festival. And we were able to get over like 18 schools involved in making their own literature. So they were making their own original prose and poetry, and they compete to actually be in the performances that happen at that festival. But they also had visual and performing arts throughout the whole downtown. So many areas become stages, and they were showcasing their art, their music, and everything, and are showcasing it now. And this was something that, again, there was another piece of the whole thing, which is I had been reading articles, because many times people have equated art with gentrification. They think that when art is in an area specifically, usually film and other kinds of media, that oftentimes artists will come into a city, they will make it beautiful, and then people will no longer be able to live there because everybody wants to come there, and they're priced out of their homes and etc. Well, one of the things is I knew, first of all, that it's not the artist that is at fault, but the system that doesn't give support for the vulnerability of a community that cannot actually stay in place because of the way that the structure is. But at the same time, I also know that there's things to contribute to it. So one of the things is I started reading a lot and found out that when you're making art in a community that is actually the symphony that plays at the school and things that are apart, it actually does the opposite. It roots community in the place, and they take personal ownership of the space in a very different way than people coming in from outside. So I started to recognize that there was also an intervention that was being caused by actually creating this literary art that was being connected from the community itself into its own location. And the familiarity that was being bred between a child using a public space that belonged to them in their own city changes the way that their future is, because they become rooted in the destination, the actual place itself, and they become personally invested in that space. And then they also will be able to fight for anything about that space because they love it and they have a familiarity and love of that place. And that couldn't be there if the student never had the interaction. So
Yeah, awesome. It's very inspiring, and I agree. Yeah. Um, okay. So I think the next question will just help us summarize it or make a conclusion out of it, because we need, some direct lines or maybe a thing that to advocate for this major issue maybe. Like, how do you advocate for bridging the academic and grassroots communities, and how do you find your passion for it? Um, like you mentioned that children needs to be in the places, and they need to be to interact with them to be able to have ownership and sense of responsibility towards the public spaces. So, um, how do we bridge that gap? And if you can just give some points so we can have, it's more easy for us leaders to um, have a conversation or advocacy around it.
So what you're saying, so how do you bridge that? How do you bridge those points? Um, well, first of all, is recognizing who your community is and who's not. Like I said to you, if we recognize that their involvement wasn't there at first, like the the woman who said, you know, I'm you if there's no children in our streets and there are no parents, that first recognition of what's missing, who's missing in those public spaces, and then trying to figure out why it's missing and how to reconnect it. So the second piece would be um, finding a way in to, and that way in for me was finding this woman who became the visual and performing arts coordinator, because something that she was able to do that I could never do is, for example, she could call all of her teachers across the whole district into a room and say, which of you are interested in showcasing what you're doing with your students in public space? And so then she had the ability to coordinate that and have folks start to come. And then the next thing was really paying attention to the interaction between the families and the public space and how they were interacting in this new space that they were unfamiliar with, and how over time they began to warm up. And I think that the greatest amplification of that is when we started seeing students creating videos of themselves dancing and performing. And then we would see those videos and we're like, and they were all done in the backdrop of the downtown space. So I think that that was another thing that really showed us that we were being successful, because they were integrated in themselves. They were starting to take ownership. And yeah, and I also, I mean, one last thing which I didn't actually mention is that there also is another side, which is the permitting of public spaces, like whether something is accessible or not. We started to find issues with access, which only would have come through us bringing these folks to these spaces. And then we didn't know that the issues were there until they were there. And all of a sudden, there were permits and things that needed to be done. So, for example, in a park, if we didn't know that there was public access issues, then we can't actually develop and help to make the public space more lively and more vibrant and really integrated into the system. And so it wasn't until we started to have people that we started to recognize the access issues, which actually helped us to develop how we're going to help with advocacy for those access issues to make them more accessible to people.
Yes, thank you so much. It was very helpful. And these were the clear points I was looking for. Okay, what would be your advice for those who are willing to advocate for child-friendly cities?
Okay, so now the child friendly city thing, this is where the question of access does come in, because so for example, informally, there are a group of young boys who love to skateboard. I remember one of my first experiences, though, was coming into a city and seeing a police officer actually stopping a child who was skateboarding and giving him a ticket. Like, he's probably 14 years old. A ticket at that age is a very strange thing to see in a public space. So, and the other thing is that I knew that if you look around, there is no place that was created for the kids to actually skateboard, even though a big group of them will often come to the downtown because it has more open space and it's safe. Another thing is, a lot of times kids want to be in a place where there's people, because they're not, they're surrounded by eyes on the street, people watching, making sure that they're safe. So um, starting to see those holes, like, okay, well, there's this whole group of youth, but there's no place for them to skate, and the public space is hostile and not allowing them in that space. So then it's like, what can we do? So then we see something like, in the back there's a parking lot that is not utilized. Well, how can we start to pilot and bring maybe some sports people that actually create the skateboards, etc., to help us set up the space so that it has ramps and things, so that maybe once a week, every Monday, the kids now, they can go and they can actually use the space to actually play. And I actually and I'm using the word actually a lot, but we saw, it was very interesting. Where were we? I believe it was in Portland. We It was a school, it was a college, and the college had not a lot of great public spaces. But all of a sudden they did create an informal parking lot, was turned into a skate ramp place. And it was the most active space in the whole area. And it's funny because when we were going on a tour with the people who are showing us the college, they ignored that area. And it's funny because we're looking at, they're trying to show us these beautiful public spaces, but they had no people in them. And then I like looked over and I said, well, what is that space? Because it looks like it's vibrant and and then they told us how there was sort of this like fight to be able to use and access the space, and how they created like even murals around the space and everything that now had become of that space. And it's really funny because we're like, well, that's a hit, that one worked, this public space is active. And so I just, yeah, I think people often overlook what is the real need of the space and what's happening informally that could become formal.
Yeah. Um, we often ignore what children actually want by considering that what we want for them is better. However,
Yes.
they know what they want and what they want to do, and we must allow them to do it. I
Yes.
think, yeah, that's the best answer because, like we say, community is the expert, children are also the experts, right?
And not only that, like what you just said, is that informal setting actually is a setting that ends up helping kids to stay out of trouble
Yeah.
and not to be getting involved, because you've actually created the space for them to to formally play with without being in a safe area, because there's a lot of people around.
Yes, exactly. Okay, cool. Okay, so you work with groups on communications and community building. How important do you think communication skills are for an individual or for anyone who is communicating a project? Any points that you want to share on it?
Communication is key. I think being able to articulate what it is that you want to do or what goals you have, I think is very, very important. Um, and it can be hard too, especially when you have a large group of people that are all separate. I mean, we do have Zoom and things to pull people together. But I also think that being able to talk to people in person, it also helps. Even I think that it's still hard, even with communication through technology. There's oftentimes that people misunderstand. So I do think it's really important to connect in person as well. Um, what was the other part of that question? It was
I wanted to know that there are people who are unwilling to listen and to make any change. How do you communicate to them and make them realize the need for them for their greater good, you know? I've seen a lot of people who are unwilling to change because they are used to something that has been normal to them for years, and change means bringing coming out of that tradition or system. So this is actually what I wanted to know. And how do you communicate to them?
oftentimes if people are very stuck in their own way of doing something, it is very difficult to communicate. But I do think that, again, even with an area where people are very dead set that they don't want to change, that there is a way, instead of fighting that, actually creating something on the side where you start to bring the folks who do want the change, and again piloting until others start to recognize and feel more comfortable, and it builds trust around whatever the system is, and we can start to pull people over that way. So not trying to go directly, like not trying to be in a polarized situation with people, but rather actually creating an external system. And we've had to do this so many times because honestly, there's public processes, even like with our city or different things, where they'll put on a formal process, but nobody really gets involved. So if you do it on the side as more of a festive like project where people feel like they're being subversive on the side, but like creating the thing, that they actually now are adopting something that we needed, but at the same time that they feel like they have that they created it, not that somebody who is like checking off boxes created for them, because oftentimes that's how it feels.
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna Oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead. Go
I
on.
was just gonna say, we did this when the city did an arts master plan. So what we did is started having these roundtable discussions with our community and just asking them, okay, first roundtable, we set up a room in a theater, and everybody was sitting on with tables on the theater, and we asked everybody, like, how would you create, like, this master plan for the arts? And people told us very directly there was like three things that came out of that meeting. They wanted a website, they wanted a heat map of where all the places for arts are, and they also wanted a registry where any artist could register to be a participant. So within 1 year's time, outside of any system, we created it. And then that's another thing, is the accountability. Oftentimes with the city or other systems, they don't actually give people back what they want, so there's no accountability. So when we created it, we're like, okay, this is completed, and then we can have a party and say, yes, the goals that we actually want, we are accountable and created, and and then people are happy. So and that is something that we enjoyed. All those parties, we got to know each other, and each one created its own next one. So, for example, the first one we asked questions, but another group had another place, to a space, this museum, and they said, we really want a networking aspect. So we want to have a party where people just network. So the first one we find is decisions. The second one became a network party. And then everybody's getting to know each other and meeting each other. And then the next one, somebody said that they wanted what was the third one? Oh, it was that they wanted a way for all of the artists to actually create the registry by having a process. So we had photographers come, and we knew everybody, they needed, like, just like Facebook, they needed to get their photo made, they needed their statements, and we turned the whole activity into a large event, which again, we had different people. It was like a snowball effect, and we were able to create it. Anyway, just
Yeah, so it's basically it's a slow and steady process, and it takes time, and it is about building trust and then letting people speak at their time and at their comfort level, right? And yes,
yes, and also,
the way you
and
said that
yes,
people have different requirements, and delivering it to them is also what creates trust.
yes, and I also think that formal system versus informal system,
Informal
and
system.
that oftentimes the minute that the formal system is going, on the side, it's like you don't want to go to the formal system. Everybody wants to have the party on the outside and create. So maybe utilizing that moment as a
Mm,
way to catalyze the real conversation with what people want outside.
great. Right. Okay, so what is your opinion on creative and innovative statues being placed on traffic islands amidst of vehicular traffic with no access to public or interaction?
So vehicular traffic, and like, are you talking about like art in public spaces, or like you're saying putting things in?
Like the traffic islands having the statue on the chalk or something like that, but being not being unaccessible to the people or the public for interaction. We have used to have
Oh,
that in past.
where it's there but it's not accessible.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of times I often do. One of the things I love is when people have islands that are actually pathways where the traffic isn't the most important thing again, that you actually have enough space that it's almost like a park that's in the center, and it allows for that. And I don't see that very often, even here in the US. And there's whole giant roads that, or we call them a strode, like it's almost like a freeway but in the middle of a city space, and there's no ability to interact at all. But when it comes to like having inaccessible art or statues in spaces, yeah, that it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially if it's supposed to muralize or memorialize something that folks can't actually use. um so I think it requires better design, right? Is that like the main thing, is that there has to be more thought put into human interaction and design.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Okay, so the reason why I've asked it is because we have a lot of statues being placed on the traffic islands over here, and we name it as the chalk or the squares. Like square is it takes a big huge space, but the traffic islands over here are only a statue that can be placed in a center of an intersection of roads, and I really want to explore them, but I can't because they're inaccessible, or there's also a threat of vandalism. And it kind of seems stupid to me that the work of art is only there to be looked at and nothing else to be explored or something like that. To be the way you said that we must have traffic islands that are placed on of its own, that people can spend time over there. That's much better than the small traffic islands with a statue being placed over it with no significance, I think. Because
Is there a way, out of curiosity, is there a way to like create an intervention where a group of people go and they tour and stand around the island and stop traffic to
I
create?
it can be a social experiment and we have to be able to bear the consequences later on.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. But
yes.
maybe we can try someday if we become that risky someday. But
Well, it
is
reminds me, what
yeah,
that reminds me of is that there are often so for example, again, children going to school, there's a wonderful placemaker who does this, where she actually, they'll get barriers and create fake barriers to allow even for families to walk better or whatever, because it's around a school area, but people are very fast and they're driving, so it doesn't give people a lot of room, and there's a lot of fatalities around those areas. So they have to create and come and pop up. They pop up and put things to actually stop whatever it is, so that everybody starts to pay attention, and then they give flyers out and say, hey, what do you think about this? And so I was wondering, like, maybe that kind of intervention can be done, because like you said, if you can't go there, but like you're going to give an art tour, you're like, let's go look at this piece of art. So you're like a docent, and you go and you're like, this is what this art is, and you have a crowd of people that are looking at the art for the art's sake, and making that kind of
Right.
intervention.
I can think about it. It's interesting. It will be fun. Okay, and I would love to know who is that placemaker. I would like to
uh
talk to her as well.
yes, yes, I'm gonna have to give you her name. She is wonderful, and she works with youth a lot. I'll give you her name, and I can't even think of right now, but
Yeah, sure.
she's, I believe it's she's in Australia.
Sure, take your time and let me know.
Yes.
Okay, and lastly, what have been your lessons from the projects in the city of Santa Ana?
Ooh, my lessons have been that it's really hard work, and you're not always going to be ever noticed or recognized for what you do. But one thing is, I have to say that I was working in an area that was really about activism, which was saying no to things. And when I got into placemaking, I started saying yes to things. It was like a creative intervention. So for me, that is the exciting piece, because you get tired always of having to fight. And that's the whole thing, like what we were just talking about, like polarization versus creation. And what we want is to create new ways of seeing and new ways of thinking about place and space, and things that make people happy, because what they're really doing is, again, building up what feels natural in terms of being able to be social, being able to be active together, being able to be a part of a linked community rather than separate, um, like in the school versus the downtown versus, like where things start to come together, and and people are able then to see like the whole system of life again in one space, and it's not separate. So um your question was about wait, what, so the question that you had was, what have I
About,
seen in Santa Ana?
yeah,
And what what you want to be very, very honest. I'm born in California, and but the city of Santa Ana is a Latino city. 80% of the population from all different parts of Mexico. There are some very distinctive cultural differences between me as a California native girl who grew up in the United States versus what is seen in those cultures. So another thing too is learning about kind of the many different aspects of distinction in cultural spaces, and learning about what it is. And there's a lot of really beautiful things that, like, we don't we traditionally in the United States don't, for example, celebrate Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead. They don't do ancestor worship, but our public space once a year is taken over, and our local community groups put on this festival that makes you have an awareness of death and life, and the rejuvenation of it through these almost what looks like a public like people have mantles or places that they put beautiful pictures, their family pictures, friends, people they've lost. They have this belief that one time of the year that they come and they walk, and the past and the future come together, and you can actually be there with and celebrate with your family again. So your grandmother's favorite food will be there in front of these are things that these experiences, when it allows people from outside to be a part of it, and off, and it has grown and grown and grown. People from all over California now are coming, and they are participating in the actual event and festival, and they paint their faces and they put on the clothing. I think that that's really beautiful because it extends something that they may not practice out into the world. Whereas, for example, other things can be very closed and those cultures don't share at all. And it's very intimate and it makes it very hard. And I think that one of the things is being able to share, especially in a world that is not all uh, being able to share something that is culturally homogeneous with a larger public is something that I think that is really interesting. And then there's a lot of things that are not shared, and that also can make it hard, especially with multiple groups. Um, and I think that because our city happens to be one of the places that is essentially spatially segregated from in Orange County, like we have like all of the folks from these cultures are there. That's something that it creates both difficulties and strengths. And essentially what I'm saying is like a lot of the spaces that I'm going to also in placemaking, they're areas where the spatial segregation has gone on for many, many years, like for hundreds of years even. And again, these questions of people feeling trust and safety in those spaces, or even whether or not they can become stewards of that space, because often those places are places that are transitional and people are pushed out, like when that's where the things like the gentrification and all those things are occurring. So what I've learned is that like people need to have those spaces where their cultural practices can be shared and that a wider public can come in and participate to create a feeling of understanding about about the people. But then at the same time, there also has to be a way that people can root themselves in place outside of that so that they can become stewards of that space. That's something I think that I feel that I've learned in Santa Ana, and it took me a long time to understand what was going on. And again, it has to do with access. And it could be something as small as that a community recognizes something. If a majority of the minority population, for example, calls a street Calle Cuatro, which is in Spanish because it's their language, and the street designation is not, it says something in English, but everybody calls it that. Having that designation to showcase that we embrace the culture that's there is really important.
Yeah, okay. So while I was listening to you, it was like that the thing about the cities or the areas where there is diversity, there must be a space where people come together and try to understand each other. And this is valuable to know because in my city, it's a diversity. It's a city with a lot of diversity because we have people from different provinces over here and who come here to learn, to educate, for education and for job opportunities as well. And public spaces with such tolerance and for the understanding for the people is required. And learning that is, even though we know it, but we need to know, having case studies from around the globe that are giving opportunities to people for their better understanding. And knowing that you have actually experienced it is um, quite worthy to us, maybe. It was good to know. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the rapid fire question. And um, these are the questions I ask everyone, and I love to know their answers. So let's start. Okay, so what drives you? What keeps you focused on public spaces or the work you do?
I think what drives me, like I think that recognizing, one of the real fundamental questions for me is like, how are we all going to live together in public space? How are we all going to live together and get along, you know? So I think that what drives me is when you can see these moments where we do get along and start to make a model of the moments that work. And when something like I said, these cultural festivals that everybody can enjoy and be together in and be really enriched by the differences, that is such a powerful thing. So I think that I'm always looking for the moments. And I think that some of the things that I've noticed is it's food, music, festivals of culture, and art that actually are those moments of merger where people can really, and also falling in love, maybe it could go cross lines. So it seems to be that with those things, um, people seem to almost, they become porous, meaning they're open. They open up and they allow something different in. And when that happens enough through contact and the enrichment of each other, that we stop being so angry, maybe, or frustrated with difference, and we start to embrace some of the differences that make us beautiful and distinct, and also maybe teach a different way of doing something.
That's very sweet. Okay, so is there any memory that you would share of the proudest moment of your work life?
The proudest movement of my work life. The first thing that comes up is I I do think that Boca de Oro was one of the most beautiful festivals to see, because we never expected it to turn out like it did. The first year we had no funding, and like we had something we thought was going to be like 5 different events, and it ended up being 15 different events, poetry and art, and then also over 2,500 students who came out and performed. And we just never knew. And it took like 3 years, I think, for the real community to totally understand what we were doing and embrace it. But those first year of seeing that occur, it was really powerful because it's just, again, not expected. And also, I think that what wasn't expected is the need for that space to be opened up. And I have seen so much change since the beginning. I've seen local authors become acknowledged in ways that they were never acknowledged. I've seen local students who've taken up poetry and writing and literature. And again, it deepens like the spirit of the arts in the place. And it also creates that sense of pride that people have for their place and space. And it becomes public and visible.
Nice. Okay, so would you share any hardest moment of your work life? It was a struggling, like a challenging moment, and what you learn out of it?
Yes, so a struggle which actually has just happened is that um for since 2000 and, well, it starts in 2013. I was working with a group for about community development being done properly, and that group actually was fighting for transparency because a lot of houses were being demolished, but all of it was dedicated to the shift that the city was making around transportation, because they wanted to put a streetcar through the center of the downtown. And when I began working in downtown, I was fighting and fighting to again stop this happening without at least people being notified and a part of it. And I began that fight in like 2014. And it actually, the actual streetcar, just recently during COVID, my whole district, people became very, very angry because the COVID had hit them and their finances, and the streetcar was being built through the middle of the town, and it was like a perfect storm. Well, even though I was a part of that early fight and also had gone through the whole process, folks blamed our group for what had happened. So a few voices came out and just spoke out against us as the ones who were part of it, even though our origins were not actually, we had been trying to help the whole time. But anyway, and our group was dissolved. So for me, there was like 8 years of work that I just felt like just got thrown away, and everything that we did just wasn't, it was not seen. So for me, that's one of the things that is really hard. And I was heartbroken. And it's like it's happened a few times where you fall in love with a place, and then you also have moments where it's like you're being mistreated, you know, and you don't know how to be in that relationship at that way. And if you're not acknowledged and recognized and have acceptance, it's very hard, you know. It's hard to always also be in a position where people are attacking either you or you know, because you are a public figure or something like that. It's very hard, you know. That's really, really hard work. And to keep your spirit and your love and your joy and your personality happy and still going, and knowing that beyond these things that it will go on, because you just kind of maybe want to sink in and just like, you know what I'm trying to say, kind of lose it. But uh at this
Yeah,
moment, like,
I
yeah.
got it. The emotional struggles are more in this area, I guess, than the physical struggles or the interactive struggles. Yeah, emotional struggle is something that is huge in this. Okay, so do you have any favorite placemaking mantra?
A mantra.
Yeah,
I don't have a mantra, but I do know that I love a phrase. I think it's Khalil Gibran, and he says that in the dew of little things, the heart finds its morning and is refreshed. So
that's sweet. And I guess I can see how it relates to your personality because you kept talking about moments and you were so happy while talking about them. That's sweet. Okay. Do you have any opinion about Pakistan or placemaking in Pakistan?
no, like I told you before, I really need to first of all visit you, and also I need to learn about Pakistan and what it's doing. And I like want to see pictures that you already showed me of like these art pieces in the media, and I want to see that. And maybe we can have you on at Placemaking US and talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on in Pakistan so that we can really educate ourselves.
Yeah, sure. I am here and inshallah look forward to it. Great. Thank you for showing interest towards learning about it and just not saying that I know I don't know and I don't want to know as well. Okay, so lastly, is there any advice that you would like to give to the young professional joining in?
I think placemaking is beautiful. It's an active verb. It's about doing. And I think that's the main thing that I would say is just try it out. Try. And I mean, people are doing it in all different spaces, but I think that definitely um it's worth it to it's worth being able to hold space and to love space and to be a steward of space. And it's part of the struggle, and it's also part of, what makes our lives rich.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madeline. It was lovely talking to you, and my heart is filled with such a sweetness and your softness and your gentleness. It's such a lovely having a leader like you in our world. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to having more from you in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, take care.
Let's do
And
something at Placemaking US, okay?
yeah, sure.
Let's do
Thank you.
something to learn about Pakistan.
Sure. We'll stay in
Okay.
touch. Take care
You
and
too.
have a good time. Have a good day. Bye
You
bye.
too. Bye.